This corner of South Central Los Angeles is as famous as any neighborhood in America. It is Watts. In some ways, life is harder than 30 years ago. Fewer jobs, more poverty, drugs. But this is a story about what has gotten better. They used to call it the reservation. The riot lasted 4 days and 4 nights, covered an area 20 times the size of Watts.
Anyone remaining upon the street will be arrested. I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly. And in the name of the people of the state of California, I command you to disperse immediately.
The eruption followed years of frustration and thwarted hopes. One man looked at these streets and saw something else. He had a vision of houses and trees and clean streets. He saw a thriving community with its own hospital and shopping center. He saw young people who would be proud to be from Watts.
We're from Watts! We're from Watts! Mighty, mighty Watts! Mighty, mighty Watts! We're from Watts!
The man is Ted Watkins.
I was born in Meridian, Mississippi in 1923, and when I was 13 years old, I had a fight with a white Western Union mail carrier, and I broke one of his ribs. And my understanding from my folks was that the Western Union whites were going to lynch me the next day, and I had to get out of town at midnight. So what I did, I caught a train called the Illinois Central in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and went to New Orleans with a tag on my neck, and then caught a train called the Agronaut from New Orleans to Los Angeles, and arrived in Los Angeles with a few bucks in my pocket and began immediately to trying to be a man.
Watkins learned how to be a mechanic. Eventually, he got a job at the Ford plant and joined the union.
Ford had people from Arkansas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Alabama, poor whites that came out here in the 30s and early 40s, after World War II, that they had on them lines. General Motors the same way. They had on them lines working. And they were producing. They were like slaves. And then when I went in there, they tried to do the same thing. I went in there in 49. And they tried to do the same thing. And I said, shit, if I fight this battle on the grounds that they want me to fight it on, hell, all of these Okers and Arkers will be on my back. Shit, I started organizing them Okers and Arkers.
Watkins was elected and re-elected to the Union Negotiating Committee.
Almost all my life, been an organizer of one type or another. When I was living in the projects, I was a tenant council organizer and organized tenants. When I was in the shop in the Ford Motor Company, I was organizing workers. And when I came out here and started working in the community, I started organizing people in the community. And that's what the Watts Labor Community Action Committee came out of, was that organizing effort.
United Auto Workers President Walter Reuther named Watkins an international representative and assigned him to work full-time in Watts. The administration in Washington had just declared war on poverty.
Today, for the first time in all the history of the human race, a great nation is able to make and willing to make a commitment to eradicate poverty among its people.
But local politicians like Mayor Yorty had a say in how the anti-poverty money was spent.
The city of Los Angeles did not want to be involved in doing anything in Watts. Sam Yorty had felt that to do anything in Watts was like rewarding the rioters.
Watts lacked housing, jobs, services. The closest hospital was many miles and a fistful of bus transfers away. The campaign for a new one became Watkins' organizing issue.
We felt that that hospital was a hub to economic growth, economic development, community organizing, community activities, all of it.
It all depended on the Board of Supervisors. These men, nicknamed the Five Little Kings, controlled the biggest, richest county in America. One became Watkins' first and best political ally, Kenneth Hahn.
I took it upon myself as a personal crusade to see that the hospital was built. So I needed Ted Watkins to help me. I said, Ted, I need your help. He said, I'll do all I can for you, Kenny.
We always approached it from body power. If we had an issue that affected the community, we would take 2,000 or 3,000 people down to the city hall and fill up the chambers and the halls of City Hall.
And then every time Ted would speak, the audience would break in a big cheer. You thought it was a football game. You looked around for the football team, but it was just Ted Watkins speaking. They cheered him and cheered him.
Very little rhetoric. Take the microphone and say, you know, to the audience that all the people that, you know, support what we're asking the governing body to do, will they please stand? Walk away.
The other supervisors did not know it was a stacked audience, but I did. But the hospital is built.
The hospital victory established Watts' labor as a power in the community. But for Ted Watkins, it was only step one. He had a master plan. With a $2 million loan from Reuther and the union, Watkins started buying up empty land.
All of my peers and doctors, lawyers, and merchant chiefs felt that we were crazy to buy land in this decrepit and rundown community. In about 7 years, we were putting houses on that land.
He was after control. Control of future development in Watts Willowbrook.
One of the things I think is by the time that we had spent the $2 million, it was too late to stop us.
Hey, look at me. Hey, look over here.
On the anniversary of the riot, Watts Labor, WLCAC, dominated the Summer Festival Parade.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
The disciplined ranks of young people stood for hope and power.
I became Miss Watts 1967. It was right after I had started working with WLCAC. It was a contagious time. We had people like Martin Luther King on one side, we had Malcolm X on the other side, we had H. Rap Brown types, and we had so much emphasis on self-determination and self-esteem presented from different angles. You almost could fit into any of those. If you were pacifist, you would go with WLCAC and SCLC. If you were a little bit more militant, you followed the Panthers and some of those organizations and Rap Brown. So at that time, it was a contagious thing going around. You were almost trapped into participating.
Watts Labor was running work programs that turned the youth of Watts, the rioters, into a productive force. They were everywhere, cleaning up the mess and farming the land under the power lines. Watkins leased it for $1 a year and got the water for free. He took it from the fire hydrants.
We used to have the thing called the growing grounds.
Right.
And we was growing greens and collards and all this stuff. And I used to sometimes reflect back and I wonder if he was growing us too, and I think he was. Ted always had a thing where you work with the kid. He'd fire people for carrying clipboards.
Clipboards, right.
He'd fire people for carrying that because when you carry a clipboard, you can't do no work. I didn't know how to do anything, really. So I ended up on work crews with the Concentrated Employment Program, planting trees on Central Avenue and painting telephone poles with whitewash. To this day, I don't know why we did that, but I think it was supposed to make the neighborhood look cleaner.
Well, you know what Ted's philosophy was on that. And when people are riding down the streets and they're drunk, the whitewash on the poles, that they see the whitewash, they won't run to a telephone pole. That was his rationale.
And the telephone pole painting led to planting 36,000 trees in South Central Los Angeles. And one of the things that, came up in one of the magazines that I had read was that chlorophyll from the trees helped to clean the air of the pollutants. And I had to assume that since we had no trees, we wasn't getting no chlorophyll to clean up the pollutants in the air. And the pollutants were deadly as far as we were concerned. So we began to plant trees.
Spring and summer, 1967. Uprisings in every major city.
And the community began to stir again about outdoing Newark, New Jersey. We had 2,600 of the worst kids in this community, as far as society was concerned, on trains going up to Camp Roberts.
In the once riot-torn Watts area of Los Angeles, the first of some 2,400 youngsters get ready for a real end-of-summer treat. 2 weeks at camp. Buses provided by the Board of Education set off for Camp Roberts, a former Army base. The encampment is some 200 miles north of Los Angeles. The real guiding spirit and organizer is Ted Watkins.
Mayor Yorty bragged that his city was the coolest in America, and he gave the credit to Ted Watkins.
No sleep for 24 hours to do all the cooking, all the supervising, all of the monitoring and everything else. It was almost an impossible trip.
And everyone hopes the Watts camp will be a regular feature of the long, hot summer.
As far as the experience is concerned, I would never go through anything like that again in my lifetime.
After Camp Roberts, Watkins was a national figure. They called him the mayor of Watts.
Ted would always tip me off when a presidential candidate was coming by. Whether it was Kennedy, whoever the president was. He said, come on down, Kenny, down to Watts. I'm going to serve chicken and ribs today. That meant a signal for me, get down there. Good food and good political context.
He nurtured the relationships with the politicians to work within the system, and at the same time, I believe he was always doing an education job on the politicians, showing them what had to be done and how to do it.
Mayor Yorty had to come to Watts to see for himself. WLCAC was just 2 years old.
Where are you going to take the mayor?
We're going to take him on a tour around Watts and different projects and programs that we got going on.
What programs specifically?
Well, we've got a poultry ranch. We're building a senior citizens park on 104th and Graham. We've got the growing grounds. We've got the credit union. We've got the consumer action program. We've got the best pocket parks that we've built. And we wanted to take the mayor around and show him to him.
And your training program for the hardcore unemployed, I think, is just great.
Thank you.
The enterprise and hard work were paying off. Watts Labor was already a local institution and an opportunity. People wanted the work.
Oh, these guys are wonderful. And nobody bothers this stuff. Nobody damages it or anything else because they know that the guys are right out of this area that are doing it. Yeah. And this is what's so good about it. And we're proving that it can be done by these guys.
It does show if they just had work for them, you know, they can do it. It can be useful.
Negotiating and working with Sam Yorty, we were able to secure one of the most valuable pieces of land in San Fernando Valley, 588 acres that we started our ranch on, and we opened up a major training center.
Saugus opened with 300 trainees. There was a big emphasis on paramedical skills, so people from Watts could get jobs at the new hospital. There was even a working farm.
I remember the first time Ted took me up to Saugus, he was really proud of this chicken ranch that he had. He told me how many thousands of eggs were laid every day. And of course, these eggs were feeding the youngsters in the training program. Other eggs were sent down to Watts and were being sold in the grocery stores, and the income generated from the grocery stores was going back to the chicken farm to get more chickens. I remember going there, and there was very loud music being played. And I said to Ted, you know, can you tone down the music? He looked at me very seriously and said, they'll trample each other if we tone down the music. It was, I just can see his face. He was looking at me like, how can you be so stupid?
Unless we produce some of the food that we eat, we are always going to be at the mercy of those who have that production.
Watkins had the audacious dream that Watts could feed itself.
Well, I still have that dream of self-sufficiency. I think that we have to be self-sufficient.
Richard Nixon came to the White House promising to undo the war on poverty.
One of those Lyndon Johnson programs that Richard Nixon wanted to get rid of was the Office of Economic Opportunity, OEO. And about every other day he would say, well, have you gotten rid of OEO yet?
John Ehrlichman was one of Nixon's top aides, and Ehrlichman was the man Ted Watkins came to see.
I was very leery of him when he first came in my office because I knew he was a labor leader. I knew that he came from Watts, and I didn't know the degree of his hostility or whatever it might be. My first impression was of this really massive guy. I mean, he was very solid. And he came in, sat down, very businesslike, told me what he wanted: money.
At that time, Richard Nixon had a slogan: black capitalism. We took on the chain of markets, ShopRite markets.
A risky idea, and an exciting one. Good food at fair prices. Profit was in. Youth programs were out. Money for the big training program at Saugus disappeared. Watts Labor had to close it.
His favorite criticism of government programs was that usually when they end, when the government and the foundation money runs dry, there's nothing left. And his main goal was to see that there was always something left, some permanent, concrete, tangible entity in the community.
Regardless of how much planning we did, or how much community improvements we done, if we didn't control any of the resources, we were still left outside.
But control is no guarantee of success.
We found out we were not operators of supermarkets and closed them down with a $2.5 million loss at the end of 2.5 years.
Ted came up with an idea about taking advantage of vacant city-owned lots and building housing because we had a housing shortage. And so we began to embark upon a housing development strategy which has continued all the way through to this day.
Everyone who lives here in Franklin Square was on welfare when they moved in. 20 years later, they pay $1 for the deed and own their own homes. Franklin Square is a textbook case of Ted Watkins' ingenuity.
Number one, the land was owned by the city, the Community Redevelopment Agency. And number two, houses were available from the expansion of the airport and the corridor for the freeway. We were able to convince the city and the airport authority that the greatest thing that they could do was to give us those houses so that we could recycle them.
He was able to purchase these houses for $1 a piece, $1 a piece. And I'm talking 3, 4, 5 bedroom homes, single and 2-story. But there was one condition, and that condition was he had to move them.
We'd cut them off the foundation, we'd stick them on wheels, and we'd roll them down Imperial at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a real gas to see a house rolling down Imperial Highway. We'd put it on a new foundation, and we designed a program where we employed 300 young men and women to learn all about the building and construction trades.
I hadn't really established what I was going to do in my life in terms of a job or in terms of a career. But most of us were just kind of like off-the-street guys who learned as we went along. This was an opportunity for me to learn a trade.
There was just one problem with Franklin Square. 39 houses, 1,500 applicants.
We had no idea that that was going to be the plan, to distribute these houses by means of a lottery.
So when they said Rose Banks, I looked around and saw who it was because I knew it wasn't me, you know. So I looked and everybody, so my daughter said, Mom, she said, that's you.
I mean, I got very excited. I ran, I threw my coat down. I said, oh my God, I won a house.
8 months pregnant. I was over 200, close to 300 pounds. And I couldn't really speak. All I could do was just wave my hands to let them know that that was me.
Franklin Square changed the neighborhood and gave families the luxury of planning a future.
When I moved here, I had 5 children, and I was pregnant with the 6th. I was on welfare, and it just gave me self-esteem. What I did, I was always doing domestic work, and I was able to turn that around to benefit myself and starting a small cleaning business. This is my 14-year-old's room. This is the bath. And this is my room, combined with my office. I use this for taking care of my little small accounts that I have and keeping records for myself. So that's about it.
To make Franklin Square happen, Watkins stretched the rules a bit. Watts Labor collects the tenants' rent subsidies and applies them against the cost of the house, creating homeowners with a stake in the community. A little of the rental income is set aside. It pays for water, insurance, new roofs, maintenance, and creates more jobs. Watts Labor runs several dozen social service programs, custom tailored to meet local needs.
Let's get the card. Have we made any plans for it?
Yes, we made plans.
3, 4, or 4, 2?
The biggest post office in the country sits on 9 square blocks that Watts Labor sold to the U.S. government. A coup of sorts, but not the deal Ted Watkins had in mind. Watts Labor paid $10 million for the property when the Goodyear plant closed, and Watkins planned his most ambitious project.
We had started out with the idea of putting 1,000 units of housing there for low-income people, for senior citizens, handicapped people.
And it had a park area for the kids, a playground, a child care. I mean, it was just a fabulous project. I had not seen any kind of economic and housing development come through South Central Los Angeles as that project did back in, this is early 80s.
And it came to the table. And
Richard McNish was now a power in city government.
It was coming up. I talked to Ted, and he gave me the eye points of what it was. And I told him that, you know, based on what I knew, based on what I believed about that organization, I was going to fight like hell to keep, you know, to get a positive vote for it.
The Watkins plan would have included housing for people about to lose their homes to a new freeway.
Congressman Hawkins was not in favor. It was a mixture of minorities who were being displaced as well as white populations. And they basically called, complained, and knocked on his door and looked him up to say, we're not going to move over there. We're not taking our families from Norwalk and Paramount and moving into South Central LA. And if you force this issue on us, we're not going to vote for you anymore.
The community and the council, and I think some of the city planning departments and what have you, basically defeated that proposal.
We were blocked. So we went to Washington, D.C. to start a process of selling them the Goodyear site for a post office.
The Martin Luther King Hospital is the success Watkins failed to achieve with the Goodyear site. It is an established institution at the center of the community, an economic hub, as he predicted long ago. The shuttle travels past the 90 acres Watkins put together when this land was a forlorn patchwork of rubble-strewn lots and tattered shacks. From the beginning, he envisioned a shopping center here. Now, after years of frustration, controversy, and deal-making, it is a reality.
It may look to the average middle-class white as any shopping center. But those average shopping centers that you are looking at don't have any black ownership. That is where the victory is. When we began to be involved in the actual management and ownership, that shopping center nets us between $250,000 and $500,000 a year. That money goes for other developments that we do for the people in this community. One of the developments that we have done is the development up in Silver Lakes. That 11-bedroom house with 11 bathrooms accommodates senior citizens and other people from this community to get away for a weekend or for a week, to at least feel another side of life. That house is a model of a plantation house. One of the things that I feel is that we should never forget where we came from. And owning the plantation house began to show where we have arrived to. I don't feel like a lot of us, and a lot of my people feel, that we should forget the past and go on with the future. I feel that as long as we can hold on to some of the memories of the past, we can improve the future and know when that future is going against us. Teddy.
Yes?
This house on 102nd, 28 squares.
What is it?
Is that the one you said you looked at and it wasn't 28 squares?
Carbon monoxide was backing up.
The gas man said
So was
Terry Watkins is her father's chief aide.
cutting off the air.
Okay.
Off the shut-off switch.
So when you clean,
Why don't you run copies of these Macs before you leave, man?
Okay. And
Okay.
it?
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Terry.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was $1.5 million contract I just signed.
His political network reaches deep into the system, from here to Sacramento to Washington.
Yeah, well, you got to come down here and visit us.
Ted Watkins is in his 70s. Despite open heart surgery, a leg lost to diabetes, and kidney dialysis, he is still the man in charge.
We haven't been one. If we had been one that went along with what we were supposed to do and what we were supposed to have, we wouldn't have put 600 houses out here in this community. We wouldn't have shopping centers in this community. We wouldn't have 300 people on our payroll in this community. If we done what we were supposed to do, because we got a place in this society as those who make the rules are concerned. And because of the way we handled ourselves, we were able to slip through the loop.
And while Ted was probably working as fast and as hard as he could to put programs and things into place to try to make Watts a better place, remember the exterior was crumbling with regard to the kinds of assistance and even attitudes that would make Watts an acceptable place. Right after those Carter years, we had 12 long, dark years where the prevailing notion is that, look, we have done everything for people of color that we're going to do. If they didn't get it during that 25 years, our bill to Black America particularly is stamped paid in full.
the last 16 years, building WLCAC...
When 60 Minutes visited back in 1982, Harry Reasoner admired Watkins' accomplishments.
By making a deal here, getting a grant there, borrowing someplace else, picking up a bargain where he can, turning a dollar with one enterprise or another, somehow he has been able to create a fragile ragtag empire that has managed to survive and flourish.
Of course, Mr. Reagan has a theory that if we tighten our belts for a while, things will get better. There'll be better times ahead.
I think that's all right if you weigh 300 pounds, but if you only weigh 100 pounds, you may not be there when it's finally gets straightened out.
Every Friday morning, Watkins meets with the directors of his various programs. These days, a meeting is more like a wake.
If that program closes, Ms. Lewis, how many people will be out of a job?
Approximately, with the laborers included and the youth between 16 and 21, approximately 250 to 300 people.
What has been hit particularly hard in the last year is job training, the CETA program.
We actually been cut back 81.1%, with a cutback of a little over $7 million.
The loss of over 80% of CETA funds is a major blow. It means the elimination of over 1,000 jobs.
Right at 1,200, Ted.
The end of a major source of connection between Watts labor and its community.
And the support of staff.
Sir, suppose you had a crystal ball instead of a coffee cup. What will Watts be like in another 17 years?
If we continue in the direction that we are headed in cutting out all of the support that a community like this is getting. Not only Watts, but New York, Washington, D.C., and Detroit, Michigan, possibly people will be at war.
In April of 1992, the fires swept through south central Los Angeles and reached to the edge of Beverly Hills. South Central has changed since the 1965 riot. The population now is about half Latino. There are more poor people. The rioters were more diverse this time, and the riot was bigger. In Watts, no one touched the shopping center. The women at the homeless shelter protected it from harm. But headquarters was looted and burned to the ground.
I was here when the first waves came through the gate, and they came through with automobiles busting down doors. And it's a very desperate situation. And anything can happen during that kind of uprising. Anything. I was shot at 6 times. I know that I'm suffering. I know that. Because at night, before I can go to sleep, I'm thinking about that toy train that was gone. I'm thinking about the jukebox. I'm thinking about all of the other things that are not here anymore. I think about going down here and getting a can of oil from the stock we had, and then remember that the oil ain't there no more. You know, it's a lot of devastation here.
28 years. That's the priority now. Is getting that cleared out and cleaned out. And then that gives you a better perspective of what is on that site as far as space is concerned.
It's kind of deceiving right now.
You feel like you kind of need to experience it empty to be able to revisualize it with something else there?
I feel like that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if we're going to have warehouse space, it would be great to have
Two-story space.
Two-story space.
So on the wish list for new building.
that while things are being developed here and in the new food stamp outlet, where we could temporarily house the portable trailer, that we could do food stamps and check
The riot was a shock to the system at Watts Labor and a challenge for the new generation of leadership. Terry's father has been training her, almost since birth, to follow in his footsteps.
Do you think she's going to get a temporary, because it'll take about 8 weeks to 10 weeks for this
construction
to take place? We've always had an open entrance and without any interference from any security, but conditions have changed.
So we would agree that the presence of the security guard needs to be up front and...
At the present time, I would agree to that, but I have some feelings about a security guard having to be there.
I understand.
I got some real feelings about that. My feeling is that if we have to have armed guards to keep the community from us,
then we don't need to be there.
Then we don't need to be there.
Something that I've been thinking about also, if I were a 15-year-old kid that lived in Nickerson Gardens, what would make me invested enough in WLCAC's big piece of property here at 109th and Central that I would feel like protecting it the next time things got nasty instead of participating in the burning and the looting.
I hear you.
So if we do something and we try and bring back some of the feelings from the community that we at one time had, and it was because of the way we operated, that maybe that's what we have to do, is bring in that good, celebratory, festive atmosphere. Something that is not just so strictly down to business, come in, take care of your business, and get out.
Perhaps the clues to the future of Watts Labor can be found in the organizing lessons of its past. Ted Watkins still relies on his uncanny ability to turn loss into opportunity and to stick to his central mission, building in the here and now.
Forklifts, tractors, every denomination of equipment that anyone can have for construction.
I think my vision is limited at this time. Limited. Putting the 9 houses on 117th Street, finishing that building that we're doing, putting the 18 homeless trailers on Imperial Highway, and then I'm trying to think out what I'm going to do with the building after it's finished and all of that. The thing is if you are dedicated to what is possible, rather than looking at what is not possible. I'm looking for answers. I'm not looking for obstacles. I'm looking for somebody to tell me how, rather than to tell me all of the things of why not, or how we can't do this or do that. I think I have proven, basically, that we can do most of the things that it takes for a community to survive.